Super salaries for sporting superstars. Who are the best paid players on earth? And can they justify their whopping wages? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Sika. Well, they perform in front of a global audience of millions, and the world's top sporting stars command salaries in the millions too. But do they warrant such high rewards? The results of a global sports salary survey have just been published, and it's footballers and baseball players who are the biggest winners. Manchester City in the English Premier League pays the most. The average annual salary for a first-team player is more than $8 million. That's $155,000 a week. In second place are the New York Yankees, the best-paid baseball team. They're followed by the Los Angeles Dodgers. Players there earning just shy of $150,000 a week. In fourth place are Spanish La Liga football club Real Madrid with an average annual wage of around $7.5 million. Just ahead of age-old rivals Barcelona, where wages work at around $140,000 a week. We have guests from the UK and the US. Let's bring them in now. In Washington, D.C., we have Travis Waldron, who is a sports reporter at Think Progress. And in London, Luther Blissett joins us, a former professional footballer who was sold to Italian giants AC Milan for $1.6 million. Good to have you both with us, gentlemen. Luther Blissett, let me start with you. As a former player, what's your perspective on this? Are these players being paid too much?
Well, the way I see it, and I think my biggest reservation about the sort of money that's going around in football at the moment is it sustainable? Is it something that we can you know, sustain into the future, and what clubs will suffer because they're paying all this money out, and if they're getting, you know, if they're recouping in any way, because it seems to me that all the money that clubs get in, they tend to hand it straight to the players, and they keep telling us that players have got a short career span, and yes, I would totally agree with that, but you still do have a long time after that to go and do something else, and players are not only footballers, you know, they do have other skills and other abilities, many go into the media and that sort of thing. So it's one of those things that you can't blame the players as such, but you know, I think the sport is football, and the clubs need to really think about the sums of money that they pay to the players in comparison to what they actually get in through the turnstiles and through all the other things, through sponsorship and that sort of thing.
And Luther Blissett, when you talk about sustainability, I mean, unfortunately, a lot of clubs in English football get in over their heads, spending too much on players. I mean, if we look at Chelsea, for example, owned by, as we know, by Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich, they made a profit in 2011-2012 for the first time since he bought the club in 2003. Since then, they've gone back into the red. They've spent more than $1 billion more than $1 billion on players. How is all of this justifiable or even financially sustainable? I mean, maybe Abramovich has the money to soak up this sort of debt, but other clubs that want to compete simply don't.
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, when you think back before Mr. Abramovich came in and took over at Chelsea, football seemed to have been getting some semblance of sensibility about the way it was run. Clubs were, you know, beginning to understand they need to really run themselves within the means, you know, what they were getting through turnstiles and through the various deals they had going on. But when Mr. Abramovich came in at Chelsea, it all went, because suddenly the sums of money went crazy again, and we started to see huge transfer fees come back into it. Sky, who's sort of a major player in this, because they're obviously covering the football, and you know, they've got a worldwide brand with that, with the Premier League, and you know, it's just gone, in my opinion, it really has just gone a little bit mad, because the sums involved now are just mind-boggling. You know, when you think about the sort of money, and you heard some of them there at the beginning of the show, of what players are earning on average at the clubs like Manchester City and whatever. It's mind-boggling, because a lot of those things, that money that's been paid to some of these players, you'd look into some of the smaller clubs could survive for an entire season on just one player's annual wages, you know. So it doesn't make a lot of sense, because if you're not recouping that money, ultimately, you know, you will have a problem. And there are many clubs in the Premier League and in the Championship and whatever are struggling, and you know, it's getting worse. and you can see them fighting to stay in the Premier League and changing managers, you know, every sort of year, every 18 months and that sort of thing, because they know coming out of the Premier League will cost them so much money because they only got the parachute payment, and they're not, you know, they lose an awful lot of money through doing this. So it puts a lot of pressure on everybody involved, and you can see why some of these managers go grey so early.
Travis Waldron, does some of this sound familiar to you? I mean, when you talk to a lot of American sports fans, they have a lot of similar complaints, whether it's about baseball or basketball or the NFL, is that a lot of these players, they simply get paid too much and they're not worth the money.
Yeah, I think you see a lot of the same complaints, but I think the structure is a little bit different. You talk about, you know, Manchester City, I know, spent more than they brought in last year on salaries. But over here, it's kind of the opposite. The Yankees, for instance, and the Dodgers in Major League Baseball, over the last 10 years, what we've seen is that the share of money going to player salaries is actually not growing as fast as revenues. I think in the last decade or so, the amount of revenues baseball has taken in are 122% growth versus just 22% growth for salaries. I think it's hard to complain on that front that the money that the players are signing big contracts, because they're actually not keeping up with the amount of revenues that Major League Baseball is making. And you could say the same thing in the National Football League or the NBA, where we've seen labor disputes in recent years, and the share of revenues that go to player salaries has actually decreased. So, you know, I think a lot of fans see this as, why are these guys making so much money? They're also generating a lot of money, and that money has to go somewhere. And someone like me, and I think a lot of fans, if you ask them, would rather it go to players than to back to the owners who are already very wealthy. Yeah, I think when it comes to English football, you do have the question of, are you separating the top clubs from the bottom? Are you spending some of these clubs into oblivion? But in Major League Baseball and NFL and the NBA right now, we're not talking about that. I think there should be maybe even more money going to players as a share of revenues over here.
Yeah, it's your point is well taken. When you get inside the numbers, Travis Waldron, this is simply the result of market forces, I guess, is what you're saying. But as far as the inequality goes, is there perhaps more you think that could be done in football, not just in England but in Europe, to sort of balance things up a bit? I mean, you have salary caps in the NBA and the NFL, and that does help to contribute to making teams more competitive. But you don't really get that in English football at the moment.
Well, there's actually, you know, some economic research that disputes the notion that salary caps necessarily increase competitive balance. Major League Baseball doesn't have a salary cap, and it's actually increased competitive balance over the last decade or so to levels that it hasn't seen in quite a while. You know, I think when it comes to English football, they've instituted the financial fair play. I know it, you know, in League One and League Two in England, they've tried to institute salary caps. But I would say that from an American perspective, there are some benefits to the relegation and promotion model, given that it forces teams to actually put money into their teams to try and win. Whereas over here, it's very easy for some of the smaller teams and even some of the bigger teams to not dump profits and revenues back into salaries and not go at trying to win the way that a lot of English and European clubs do.
Luther Blissett, you think this financial fair play is the right way forward? I mean, it's similar to the salary cap idea in the US. Do we need to see more of that and more of it being enforced?
Well, I think anything we can do to save a lot of these clubs from going to the wall, because, as I said previous, there's a lot of clubs that are really teetering on the brink of going under at the moment, and for them, you know, survival within the Premier League is just key if they're going to maintain their competitive, you know, being competitive as the seasons go on. And you know, the gap between the haves, which are the very big clubs, and you've got maybe 3 or 4 of the very big clubs, and then you've got really the rest. And so it does make it very difficult. So for me, whatever can be done to stop the clubs really putting themselves out of business, you know, I think that's been done, because everybody wants to be the champion, everybody wants to be the #1, but the reality of that is, we all know, and I mean, I think it's the same in the States in the various you know, whether it be baseball or basketball, that, you know, really the champions are only going to ever come out of 2 or 3 clubs, and you need to really manage yourself to a degree to say, no, this is where we're going to be, this is where we're at, and you know, you gradually try and build something so that ultimately one day you can actually compete with those very large clubs. But everybody's trying to do it in one, you know, huge bound, and it's just not really working. So if it's salary caps or if it's the fair play thing that's coming in, to make people really need to think about how they're actually going about this. And if this means that clubs will maintain well, I should say not maintain, you know, will survive into the future, so supporters will have their clubs which they love, and they're the one people that are always there. You know, we as players, managers, coaches and whatever, we come and go, but the supporters of these clubs, you know, they're always there, and we should never forget that it's for them. And you know, sometimes that can be forgotten in all this thing when people are searching for glory.
Indeed, we'll talk more about the fans' place in all of this. But Luther Blissett, I just want to pick up on the point that you mentioned earlier about the same 2 or 3 clubs always being up there every season. I mean, we mentioned Roman Abramovich, the owner of Chelsea, before, and there's also Sheikh Mansour, who owns from Abu Dhabi, who owns Manchester City. I mean, these men are easy targets because of the amount of money that they put in to these clubs. But there is an argument that says if it wasn't for owners like them in the English League, in the English Premier League, you'd have Manchester United and Arsenal winning the title pretty much every season, and that is in fact how it was for a while. So haven't they helped to bring in a little bit more variety, a little bit more competitive balance, if you will?
Yes, no doubt about it. And but my thing about it is, you know, the vast sums of money that they've been able to put in and bring into the game. And yes, it's been great overall for you know, the way football is now perceived all over the world. But it's still isolating those few clubs from everybody else, because it's very difficult to bridge that gap. You know, when you have very wealthy people can put in whatever they feel like putting into it to enable that club to move forward, and everybody else who's having to really work very hard at it. Because the other thing it does is the disparity in players, because you get teams like Chelsea. I mean, I think Chelsea have got quite a number of players at the moment out on loan, which is just an astonishing number of players that are on loan, because they've got so many players to choose from. And yet the manager will always want more, because that's the one thing we all know what human beings are like. We always want more. We're always looking to strive better. We always want to be better and bigger than we are. So yeah, it's been good news that the fact that Manchester City's come onto the scene now, and they've been very competitive now. It's great to see Liverpool now, you know, with American owners and what they've done. But they've gone about it, you know, they've spent a lot of money as well, but they have not gone about it in quite that sort of way. And Liverpool now are looking, you know, on the verge that they might be the next champions of our Premier League. So it's great to see the other clubs coming into the mix and showing that they might be able to do it. But ultimately, it will always be between those 3 or 4 clubs.
Travis Waldron, how much does TV money play a part in all of this? I mean, over the last 20 years, both in the US and in Europe, we've seen huge amounts of money invested by the television networks to televise all of these games, and of course it's filtered on through into the clubs and through players' wages. Has that necessarily been a good thing?
I think it has. It depends on how you approach it. The main driver of revenue growth in American sports is television revenue. Whether it's the NFL, whether it's Major League Baseball, even the NBA, and even I think the United States has been a big help to the English Premier League with NBC's deal and Fox's deal to broadcast the FA Cup and the Champions League. I think has been a big help. I think giving fans options to watch games is a good thing. Again, in a lot of ways, those revenues have not been pushed down to players. They've not made their way. I go back to that number in Major League Baseball, where revenues have far outpaced the growth in salaries. And when it goes back to England for a second, a point Luther made, you know, I think I was reading earlier that while Manchester City and Chelsea have spent more in recent years, more revenues, more on salaries than they've had in revenues, that's the exception to the rule, I believe. I think even Manchester United and Arsenal and a couple of the other big clubs are spending a relatively sustainable amount of their revenues on salaries. I could be wrong about that, and you can definitely correct me if I am, but you know, I think the point is when you try to create competitive balance here, whether it's in the Premier League or the NFL or baseball or wherever, is you can't. I think you have to be careful not to take a bunch of money from players just to give it back to the owners, because it is ultimately the players who are out there doing most of the work, and they deserve to share equally, if not more so, than they do in the revenues they create.
All right, at this point, we're going to bring in our third guest, joining us from London, Skylet Andrew, who is a sports and entertainment agent who used to represent English footballer Sol Campbell. Thanks for joining us, Skylet. We've just been talking there, as you heard, about all of the money that has gone into professional sports over the last few years, and the huge amounts of money that are being paid to some of the top sports stars. A lot of fans, if you ask them, will say it is simply too much. They're not worth the money. I mean, when you look at the wages of some of the highest earners, people like Cristiano Ronaldo, Wayne Rooney, making $500,000, close to $500,000 a week. Obviously, they're at the top of their game. They're hugely important for their clubs. And as a sports agent, it's your job to give players the best deal. But how do you justify these sorts of numbers to the average fan who is having to pay things like increased ticket prices every year, higher prices for the team shirts and that sort of thing?
Well, I think sport and entertainment always has its stars, and no one seems to speak about the big earners in TV and film and music. It's only right and just that footballers get what they deserve in an industry that is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So it depends on what industry you're in. You know, football generates huge audiences all over the world, and it generates huge finances, and no one has to pay a footballer a certain amount of money. It's just that we work in a demand and supply society where the best footballers, and there are very few, you know, the Ronaldos, Messis, Rooneys, etc., these guys are right at the top of their game. So it's only right that they should be paid accordingly in relation to how much money the industry generates.
Luther Blissett, what's your view on that?
Well, I don't really have a problem with the very best in whatever getting the sorts of money they're getting, because I think that money, you know, their performances will be, whether you pay them an absolute king's ransom or whatever you want to call it, or just, you know, those players will go out and give of their best and perform to their best at any time. No different to somebody like an Elton John, who, when he puts a concert on, you know, his concert, you know, it's going to be of a standard every time he goes out, and he could be doing one concert every night for a week. You know the standard and what he's going to deliver is going to be exactly the same. You can't guarantee that with football. So it's, you know, for the odd player to be getting that sort of money, I think is fine. But my problem is when now you're getting players that at a very young age are getting this sort of money, and they don't know how to deal with that. And sometimes it takes away that hunger. And I mean, I talk to a lot of supporters about it at the various clubs that I've been, and you know, that's a major thing that people say. You know, what is there left for these players when they're getting the sorts of salaries that, you know, at the age of 19 and 20? You know, what is there left for them? Because for sometimes it takes away the hunger from those players, and it's mainly at that end of it where I have reservations about salaries. I think the very top players have shown what they're capable of doing, and you know, as you say, market forces dictates that they get that. It's the same difference as you go in any big businesses. You know, the person at the very top at the of these big businesses who perform well and bring in the revenue and the business, that's, you know, they get very well rewarded for it. And I don't see football any different from there. I just think that it's the levels that we pay some of the younger players coming through, that they come in with this expectation to be millionaires on their first contracts. And, you know, for me, a lot of these players never go on and fulfill that because they've been given far too much too early. Let's
put that point then to Skylet Andrew. I mean, you know, Luther Blissett makes the point there that some of these young players are making too much money too quickly. Perhaps the incentive there is, you know, it needs to be sort of incentivized so that they earn that salary first, and then they can get the big contract. But when you get a player who's 19, 20 years old, and this amount of money is being offered to them, is that really a good thing for the game?
No, let's put things in perspective. We're talking about the very high end. You've got League Two, League One, Championship. A young player signing his first professional contract at a League Two club is going to be earning £150 a week. What we're looking at is the cream at the top. We're looking at the players at the very big clubs, and there are certain young players that are being paid lots of money to sign a contract. Now, the people around him the club have a responsibility to the player, I would say, to make sure that he keeps his feet on the ground. But those players come with extra pressure. You don't get anything for nothing in this world. If you're going to be at a top club and you're going to get a big contract, then you have to deliver. Young players that earn lots of money, the focus has to be on their craft. They shouldn't even be worrying about the money. They should be thinking about, how can I develop into becoming the best player I can possibly be? And they need help from people around them. Just because a young player has played money, it shouldn't mean that he should take his eye off the ball. And money's relative to what someone earns in League One, League Two. Yeah, what the guys are getting in the Premier League is a lot of money, but football is so competitive. You've got more chance of winning the lottery than playing in the Premier League. I watch thousands of players playing every Saturday in youth games, in under-21 games, and very few of these guys come through. So what we have to remember is that the ones that do come through deserve to get what they get because it's so competitive.
Yeah, Travis Waldron, I mean, the point that Skylet made there about the sort of this is all relative, and the amount of inequality in the game. At the low end, there are so many more players who don't get paid anything like as much. I mean, just in doing a reading up on this, in the NFL, for example, you have a small number of players who get paid millions every year, but then you get the linemen and the field goal kickers and so on who get paid a lot less. It's something like a few $100,000 a season, which might seem like a lot, but in the general scheme of things, it's not a huge amount. Some of these players, they take a huge amount of punishment week in, week out physically. Are they really being paid what they're worth? I mean, when you look at it from that point of view.
Well, and that's what I would suggest in this whole conversation, is that if we're talking about reducing salaries at the top, perhaps we should be talking about, putting that money into helping players that aren't at that level, whether it's in the League One, League Two, or the lower end players in the NFL. I think that's rather than, again, sending it back to owners or management, helping those guys out. I would suggest that, there are a lot of players in the NFL who probably are making what they are worth in the market, but they have not been given necessarily enough to what we think of as rich, as the rich NFL football player in the United States. There are a lot of guys who, because of NFL rules, are struggling compared to most of their players. And if we're going to actually maybe reshape financial models of how we pay players in any of these sports, perhaps it should be to help out players that are on the lower end, as opposed to just letting it flow back into league revenues and team revenues.
Luther Blissett, presumably you'd like to see more of that. I mean, more assistance, more financial help being given to players and clubs at the lower end.
Yes, I would. Yes, I think that's a very, very valid point. And there is a lot of money going around at this top-level sport, but we've got to look after. And we have this thing where we always talk about grassroots, and we need to do far more to improve what that money as it goes down, as it trickles down to grassroots, to the lower division teams, because there are still players down there that could make it within a couple of years to get into the top flight. But if they don't get the opportunity to be out there playing all the time, because clubs can't pay these players enough money, so they want to stay in the game, and then we lose a lot of players because they think to themselves, I can go out there and earn more out there doing another job and play part-time, rather than playing the lower divisions. And we can lose players that way. So it's quite important, I think, that some of that money should go down to the lower leagues, so that clubs, for one thing, have got can sustain themselves better by some of this money going down, and it will help everybody, because ultimately, for football to be as strong and as popular as it is around the world, and everywhere you go people love the game, and for it to be sustainable, I think that money needs to be shared around far better than what it is at the moment.
All right, and on that note, we've got to leave it. Thanks very much, all three of you. Skylet Andrew in London, Travis Waldron in Washington, and Luther Blissett also in London. Thanks very much for your time. And you can let us know as well how you feel about what you've heard online. Just add your voice to this discussion at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, and we're on Twitter. Our address there is @AJ Inside Story. I'm Hazem Sika. For me and all the team, goodbye for now.